Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, Stories of the Supernatural. And I hope you enjoy this new show, whether you're viewing it on the internet or listening to a podcast version of the episode. I do want to thank you for being part of my audience. You can also find links to videos or podcasts on miamighostchronicles.com, as well as where you can submit your story about any eerie experiences you've had, which I would love to hear about. Just go to the Submit Your Story tab. Please subscribe to our channel so that you receive notification of when we release a new show. And find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. This is where I usually live stream and where I give you a behind-the-scenes look at locations where new episodes are being filmed at. I also tell you about all the interesting guests that will be appearing soon on Stories of the Supernatural. I hope you enjoy the show, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, Stories of the Supernatural. How are you all doing today? I'm doing great. The reason being I've got a fantastic guest on. This is a paranormal investigator and an author by the name of Brandon Callahan. And Brandon was born and raised in Kansas City, Missouri. He has traveled the world while serving in the United States Air Force. And he's worked to develop new theories with existing ones in the paranormal field to allow for more knowledge and the ability to assist those in need. Now, he's been actively investigating paranormal activity in the field for many years, and he's also developed a method of tracking potential hotspot locations throughout the world. Besides being an author and investigator, he's also an aspiring filmmaker, and he's been a founder and co-founder of multiple paranormal investigation teams. And of course, he offers help to those who need help, especially when they're dealing with the paranormal, which sometimes can get like a little bit, sometimes it can get even dangerous depending on what's happening with you. But anyway, let me bring Brandon on. How are you doing today, Brandon?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Brandon, I'm going to ask you what I ask all of my guests, which was, how did you become involved with the paranormal? Was it an experience or what happened?
A little of both. Always growing up drawn to the Halloween side of things, the darker side of things. It was just kind of a natural draw for me.
Okay.
And then I actually did have an experience, really one of my first close personal experiences when I was overseas in Turkey during my Air Force days.
Oh, I got to hear about that. What happened?
Well, in that part of the world, there's a lot of ancient ruins all over the place, and we used to go and explore. And we actually came across one on a really hot summer day. It was well over 100 degrees outside, and as we were exploring, I was making my way down a set of stairs, and in the middle of the daylight, in the heat of the day, I actually began to be able to see my breath because it was so cold about halfway down the staircase.
Wow.
And yeah, and I kind of blacked out for a few seconds, and it kind of was just as though I just tranced out. And when I kind of came to, I just really had no idea what was going on. And by exactly where I had been, and I was seeing my breath, it was just as hot as it had been before. And so it was just a real quick experience, but I couldn't explain it.
Right.
And so it really kind of started to pique my interest, you know.
And let me ask you, what was this? Was this just, what part were you in? I mean, that's a really unusual experience. Was there
Hmm.
something? Did you ever find out? Was there something that happened at that location? And of course, I know what you mean by Turkey. I mean, definitely talk about ancient. That's
Hmm.
ancient right there. So sometimes it would be even
Oh yeah.
difficult to tell what might have even been there at one point.
Oftentimes they would mark them as to what the structure to be, and this happened to be an old Coliseum, and so there were a lot of staircases.
Wow.
Um, yeah, and so this happened to be an old Coliseum. It was really cool. They were, those things are all over the place over there, and we did. We used to just go on the weekends whenever we'd have some downtime, and we'd just go kind of explore. And I never really had any experiences quite like that, and so that one really started to pique my interest, and that's really when I think my interest started to kind of boil over as far.
So, Brandon, after you had that event in Turkey, what happened after that?
Well, after that, excuse me, it really piqued my interest, and so that's when I decided that I was going to really start attempting to pursue these things. You just actually, rather than reading and researching, I wanted to actually get out and see what I could really find and experience myself. And that was shortly before I actually came back stateside from the Air Force.
Okay, did you ever have any other weird experiences like that? Because that was pretty intense what you described there.
Not really obvious experiences. We had traveled throughout Europe and went to all kinds of different places that I would really like to go back to.
Mm-hmm.
But really, until I started investigating, I didn't really have any really additional experiences up until we really started working out in the field once I put everything together when I got home.
What did you do? So what happened when you came back? Did you join a group or did you start a group? What happened?
No, actually, I started just doing as much research as I could.
Okay.
I don't really venture into much of anything without something of a plan.
Good
And
idea.
since I didn't really have actual field experience, I started doing a lot of research on
Mm-hmm.
equipment and things of that nature. And I actually had put together the team that I originally worked with. Just happened to be a friend of mine that I was working with here, and my brother and another good buddy of ours. And so it was the four of us kind of from the beginning. And then actually one thing that it kind of forced me to make a real decision as far as whether or not I really wanted to pursue this was shortly after our first investigation of a house that my brother had been living in, and they had always been very uncomfortable. And we actually lost one of our friends shortly after we had investigated. He was there with us the night we investigated. And, I don't know that it was necessarily attached to anything that may have happened, but he was very young and healthy.
Okay.
It kind of came out of the blue. And we had actually received the first EVP, the first absolute Class A, without question EVP that I had ever gotten was from that first investigation, and it actually said, "Get you dead." And within 2 to 3 weeks after that investigation, sure enough, one of the guys that was there, he died under fairly mysterious circumstances. They called it walking pneumonia.
Wow.
But he died in his sleep. Yeah.
God.
And so it was shortly after we discovered that. And so obviously I didn't know what to make of it. I mean, it's something that you just don't know how to respond to. You don't know how to react to it.
I bet.
And so,
Let me ask something. Was this the house that you were saying that your brother had lived at one point but wasn't comfortable when he was there? Is that the one?
right. And he had actually been having a lot of health problems. He came back from his Army days in pretty bad physical shape, just due to circumstances while he was in. And, he almost died in that house as well.
Because you answered my question, because I was about to ask you exactly what you just answered was what happened to him when he was there. Did he have health problems? And from what you're telling me, yeah.
He did. Well, he
Wow.
had actually fallen off the cliff. And
What? He what? He fell off a cliff?
he had actually fallen off the cliff while he was in Korea.
Oh my
And
God.
and so he had some pretty severe back problems, well, to this day. And so, yeah, he had been doing work with the VA and everything to try to get better, had some surgeries and things of that nature. And there was kind of a fluky thing that happened after one of his procedures to where it almost ended up killing him. So there was just a lot of kind of strange things that had sort of surrounded that time. And it all just, you can call it coincidence or whatever you might. I wouldn't necessarily say it's paranormal, but these kind of strange coincidences seem to coincide with our diving into this field.
Okay.
And over the years, there's been, I can't even count the experiences just outside of the work that we do, personally, because I typically focus on things that I experience because I have firsthand knowledge of that and understand, my place mentally and physically and everything else. And so I try not to read into a lot of other things that people tell me they experience simply because I'm not there typically. So but yeah, over the years, we could probably be here for hours, and I could tell you. As a matter of fact, don't be surprised when we start to get into certain subject matter if you and I have some pretty serious. There's going to be problems. There's going to be, whether it's phone issues, computer issues.
I know. I call this paranormal sabotage. I've already experienced that with different. I know exactly what you're talking about. It happens
constantly.
I have my own. I made up my own thing. It's called paranormal sabotage, and I know exactly what you mean. Maybe we were having that already.
Right. Well. Typically it's during certain subject matter, but
okay.
But yeah, it's very, very common. I'm not on my landline today, but so yeah. I mean, of course, with cell phones, sometimes.
Oh no, I know.
They're iffy, but yeah, it happens. I have a lot of energy that tends to, I don't know about follow me around, but I think sort of attach from time to time. And I think that's just been more or less developed over the years. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's just very difficult to really cleanse yourself completely of that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yes, and that's one of the things, because I've been a researcher and an investigator since the 1990s. And, lately with all the shows, like in the last few years, it's become more mainstream in the sense that a lot of people have gotten into it. And I tell them, sometimes once you get into this field, there's something that, and I understand when people do the protection prayers and when they cleanse themselves, whatever system or rituals or whatever it is that you got going on to protect yourself. But there's always something about you that once you're out there trying to communicate, things seem to get attracted to you regardless of where you're at. It's just something that comes with the territory. And some people find out too late what that's about.
The analogy that I always make, it's in certain places. It's not everywhere.
No, and it's not everywhere.
But certain places, it's like you dive into the pool with all your clothes on, and when you get out, it takes an awful long time to dry off.
Yeah.
And so for me, in some locations, it's as though I need time to quote unquote dry off after I've been there, and it just takes a long time sometimes.
Yeah.
And so that's, because we are in essence in some places that I've been, it is definitely, it's kind of a metaphorical pool of energy, and sometimes it's not positive energy.
Of course
and
not.
The more negative, the longer it can take. And sometimes it, I've even been down for a year because of certain things that had happened.
Sure.
And, some people say that they're going to, retire or stop doing this stuff and everything else, which, everybody has their thing. But I'll be honest, I'll just flat out tell you, there's going to be periods of time that I'm not going out doing this. And there's a good reason for that.
Sure.
It's not, it's not a retirement. It's not anything like that. It's that I need time to cool off. I need time to get back cleanse myself mentally and emotionally and spiritually.
Of course.
And so sometimes it just takes a while.
And you know what? That's very smart. And all my time, usually I was a freelancer as far as investigations, and I would work with a group that covered all of Florida, and they would contact me when there was something down in South Florida, or if they were really short, because sometimes I would travel to places and everything. And I've worked also with other groups. And one of the things I always looked at, and I tell everybody, is like, how are you doing physically? And people look at me like, what do you mean? I say, especially, because a lot of times I would do the preliminary questioning or conversation with the parties involved, and I would get a good idea of what was going on, which, by the way, that's another thing I tell. One of my good tip-offs that I was onto something intelligent was that I would have things happening in and around me before I even started. Okay. That was my first tip-off, that it was like, okay, there's something here. But I would say, even bringing in a team member that's feeling that they're exhausted or they've got a cold, I tell them, if you've got anything, and I'm not going to say this all the time, it doesn't, but if you've got something that's a little bit on the malevolent side in there, guess who they're going to aim for in that group? They're going to go after the person that's physically.
Absolutely. And that's the emotional side of it that a lot of people just don't know. And,
yes.
I've actually witnessed from the outside teams just completely implode on each other because nobody was right. Nobody was right mentally before they even started doing this.
Yes.
And all that's going to do is it's like pouring a huge can of gas on an open flame. You can't be off in a mindset that's not correct and be able to do this and be productive at it. If anything, you're making bad matters worse.
Oh, yeah. Because I'm telling you, if you've got anything that's intelligent and malevolent, okay, first of all, they're always going to look for the weakest link in the chain to scare the group off. Like, hey, they usually go, like I said, either somebody that's physically exhausted or sick or might have emotional problems, maybe temporarily. Something could be happening in their personal life, and that's who they're going to aim for. And sometimes it does happen what you say. Sometimes it can even wreck a group, especially if they're not gelled real good or if they know what's happening. I've seen that. I've seen that happen. And I've had some people where I've said, like they said, I'm so tired, or I didn't make it. And I was like, do you really want to? And they look at me like, why are you taking this so seriously? And it's like, it's not that I'm taking it too seriously. It's that I've been around and I know that for your own good and for you not to become a liability to the team, believe me, I'm saving you a big headache, because if there's something in there that truly wants us out and knows how to manipulate things, guess who there's going to be in their crosshairs? It's going to be you. Okay? And I've gotten looks like, are you kidding? And I'm like, I'm not kidding. And I agree with what you said. There's been times where either I've got too much going on, like physically I'm tired. Like I've bowed out from investigations and I've said, no, I can't go. All right. Because I know myself enough to know maybe not. Sometimes, and I'm sure you've had that experience. You'll go to a location. There really isn't anything there. Or if it is, it's maybe residual or, but even then, not till you really find out for sure, you're really risking yourself. And, like I said, a lot of the shows make it sound like all you have to do is get some equipment and walk into a supposedly haunted location, and there you go, voila. And it's like,
sure.
Let me tell you something. Some people have had some really disagreeable experiences because then that thing attaches to them and makes their life a living hell. But by increments. And this is one of the things I tell everybody. Sometimes everybody thinks of the Hollywood version, like 3 days later, things are flying around in your house. And I said, no, this thing works very, very subtly. Little by little, a month later, 2 months later, your life, everything starts going down in all areas. And I guarantee you that about 6 months later or a year, you go back to the point of origin, and I bet you that was the point of origin.
Well, the perception is that anything and everything has to work on a clock, and the fact of reality is that our clock, our 24-hour day, is man-made. It's something that we program ourselves to respond to,
Right.
But when you're dealing with something that we can't even fully explain, how on earth can you apply our own logic and our own time frame and our own schedules? It just that in and of itself, if you're expecting immediate results at all times and that this is just a one-time face-to-face and then it's gone and then that's that, then you just shouldn't be doing what you're doing because you're not understanding the scope of what it is that you're venturing into.
No.
We're not dealing with our three-dimensional reality. We're just not.
It's not. And a lot of people, they're going in it for the thrills, or they, like you said, because they really don't understand the concept behind it. Now, let me ask you, which, by the way, after that experience, what happened when here you go on this investigation, you get a fantastic EVP, but within less than a month, a friend of yours sounds like passed away from one day to the next, for lack of a better word. Did that ever make you pause and think, was there a connection between where you had been at and what happened to him?
It did. Of course it did. Because we had never, it actually turned out to be a pretty fruitful investigation on the audio side. We didn't have a whole lot going on that was really in your face at the time, and so we discovered most of it after the fact. But some of the stuff that we discovered, it was mostly negative, and, that was the first time that we had ever done this.
Okay.
And so, when there's such a drastic result shortly following what we did, of course I had to ask myself, what am I getting myself into?
Exactly. I was about to say, so obviously you went forward, but I'm sure it made you consider really hard, like, is this a good idea?
Well, of course it did. And that's always been my approach is, with this type of work and when you start to experience certain things and you put yourself out there in an attempt to help people that have problems, you have to just reconcile the fact that you're going to eventually have to deal with whatever it is that you're out there looking for. People think about but they have no idea what potentially could happen afterwards.
No.
And so, in both of my books kind of dive into a lot of aspects of that. I have never been one that parades myself as some sort of an expert. As a matter of fact, if you apply the word expert to yourself and you're in this field of research, then I call you a sham immediately. Because I don't care how long you've been doing it. I don't care what the results are. All I'm saying is you can't explain what we're all trying to explain. I don't care who you are.
Yeah.
So there is no expert by definition.
Absolutely not. There's absolutely not. Absolutely not. There's too
so
much that's
to
not
me,
known.
Part of my books is to educate people about the fact that this is not all TV, glamour, and roses. I fully admit my shortcomings and my idiocy to that extent. I tell you, I was a moron, and that was part of the reason that I wanted it published, because I brought terrible things on myself. And so people need to learn from that and say, whoa, rather than saying, well, this guy's a moron. Well, that's the whole point, is that, I had to learn. I had to develop my skills and everything else throughout these processes. And as I did, I won't make certain mistakes again. I can guarantee you that.
Oh, sure.
And so, I've never wanted to try to come across to anybody as some sort of a self-proclaimed expert or anything to that effect. I just tell you, look, here's what I do. I have my theories, and this is how I approach it, and come along with me. I'm going to tell you how it goes. That's what my books are. But it doesn't always end well, that's for sure. And I don't always have the answers, that's for sure. But It's something that I'm passionate about, and it's something that I feel like I'm very good at. But certainly you'll never catch me calling myself any sort of an expert, that's for sure.
Well, and that's the thing, and you made a good point, because the truth is that for all we think we know, even then, there's a lot we don't know. We don't know.
Sure.
And
it's all theory.
Yeah,
every last bit of it is theory.
And every time, and this is, I've told everybody, there's no shortcut, especially in this field, for experience. You could read all the books you want, all the books you want.
That's
But
right.
where you really gain the experience is in the field work. Either going to places that have nothing, or like you said, doing stuff that you think, I'll never do that again. And there's no shortcut to it. And I mean, I've even said it, on some of my other shows, especially to people that are looking either to join a group or to use a group, like they need help. I said, first of all, you need to look at some group that's had a little bit of longevity. Okay, because a lot of the groups, they dissolve really quick. I said, because chances are that if it's a group that's been around for a while, they've learned things that you only learn by doing this for a while. And by a while, at least 2, 3, 4 years, because there's just things that no matter how much you plan for it, you don't figure it out till you're right there in the middle of it.
Right.
And now let me ask you.
And just when I start, go ahead.
No, go ahead. What were you going to say?
Oh, no, I was just kind of on that point. Just when I start thinking, that I've experienced so many amazing things and everything else, and you almost feel like, well, what else is there? Something brand new. Yeah, something brand new just slaps you right upside the face.
Oh, yeah.
And something that you don't even comprehend. And so that's been one of the, more frightening things that I've kind of gone through over the years. But at the same time, it's also one of the things that makes me keep going out, is the fact that you can read all the books, check out all the websites, do whatever you need to do, but you're never going to have a full grasp of what personal experience can teach you. And so that's why, my little goal here is to try to help people and help educate people and to tell stories. I love the stories. A lot of times these are forgotten stories that I think shouldn't be forgotten, which is a really good example of why I wrote the second book, because it's a story that gets swept under the rug. But I think it's atrocious that we as humans sweep these things under the rug. These stories need to be out there. And so the historical aspect is something that draws me in, but then also these very unique personal experiences. I don't claim to turn a skeptic into a believer. I truthfully couldn't care less who believes what.
Right, exactly.
When you read my books, it's not my job to convince you to believe anything. I really don't care. Did you enjoy the story? That's my question. Do you feel like that story was worth telling? I really don't care if you believe it. I was there, and I choose to share that. But whether you believe it or not, I don't have time for all that. I don't have time to try to convince somebody that won't be convinced. That's not my game.
And you know what? You make a very good point, and I tell everybody this. When you've had your own personal experience, whether you were able to capture it, on anything or not, you just had the experience with your eyes and your ears, and you know it. And you already went through your checklist of things that it's not that. Like, okay, you know how you do this checklist of it's not that, it's not the wind, it's not whatever. And you realize for yourself, was paranormal, this was whatever it was. It's like, that's it. You've proven it to yourself, like you said, whether anybody ever believes you or not. Okay, you know what you experienced. And I think that for people who actually have that experience, there's like a paradigm shift of your reality inside of you as to what's out there. You might not know totally, but this is not of this world. This is not normal, or this is not explainable by natural source. You know it. Okay.
Well, and that's what's so amazing when you're working with people that deal with these experiences almost on a daily basis for years and years, and they've convinced themselves that they're crazy because everybody from the outside looking in claims that they are. But then when we're there and we can experience something with them or something that they've described to us, the look of just relief on their face is completely priceless.
Yes. Because
they understand that they're not alone. That these things are difficult to explain, and just by our nature, we don't typically just knee-jerk believe everything that we hear just because we weren't there, which is perfectly fine.
Sure.
But in my opinion, being a hardcore, just diehard skeptic is one of the laziest jobs I know of in the world. because it's not hard to sit online and say, BS, prove it to me. Well, why don't you get up off of your butt and go out there and, do what you got to do.
But
Find out if it's real. Find out if it's not.
But you know what, Brandon? I'm going to tell you, and this is one thing that I tell everybody. I said, you know what? A lot of people, and I'm not going to say, I can't speak for everybody, but, a lot of people say, people are paranormal investigators, they're willing to believe anything. I said, no, I'm the biggest skeptic there is. Believe me. After you've seen and heard so many things, you have a list of things that before I actually say, okay, we got something going on here, believe me, I'm a pretty good skeptic, but I'm out there doing the work, like you said. And I'm quick to realize, okay, this is not this or that. So, okay, now I'm dealing with this. But I don't jump at anything and automatically think, oh, it's paranormal, it's a ghost, it's whatever. It's like, not really.
Absolutely.
Because after a while, when you go and you're out in the field,
you find that do this that are.
There's a million things that sometimes could, make a noise. Sometimes even give you a cold spot. There's a million sources of things. But after a while, you and that's where the experience thing comes in, where you realize, no, there's something here, especially if you investigate a little bit, like you said, like you do the work, and you realize, okay, now we've got either, something definitely is going on, whether, like I said, whether it's residual or an intelligent or whatever the case might be. And then you take it to the next step. But absolutely, being a paranormal investigator, you're a skeptic in there. You've got I'm a skeptic, but because that's my own inner skepticism that I think all paranormal investigators should have. Because you're always going to run into situations where it isn't supernatural. It's not a ghost. It could be it could be just natural stuff, or even sometimes you will even get people that, unfortunately, nowadays they're so thrilled that they got a haunted house that they make up stuff.
Right.
So, absolutely, I know exactly where you're coming from as far as, but it's really easy, like, when you're out in the, saying, knocking every theory down, but you don't go out there and do the work either.
Sure, which is perfectly fine. Everybody's entitled to, think what they want to think. And so I don't get offended, but, in the end, like I said, if I were to lose sleep over trying to convince people of things that frankly, I still look back on a lot of my experiences and still can't make full sense of it. And so if I'm going to try to convince somebody of that, that's just a complete waste of my time. That's, there's no point in that whatsoever. And so that's the thing about my approach to telling these stories is I just simply want to put that story out there. There's always a reason for the story the reason I want to put it out there. Those reasons do vary depending on the story, but in the end, it's certainly not to convince people to believe in ghosts. I just don't care. I don't care what church my neighbor attends, but I still care about he or she as my neighbor.
Oh, sure, of course. Like, right, yeah, how to leave aside one thing, doesn't make the person, in other words.
Well, we're all human, and our mindsets are developed from completely different life experiences, and that's why I think differences need to be more embraced rather than a source of combativeness.
Sure.
Everybody's going to be different. And
what?
Where,
if we were all the same, it'd be really boring. I'm sorry.
Exactly. And so, but now, unfortunately, those differences are just turning into points of just antagonistic anger toward each other. You're not like me, and so you must be bad. Yeah. And that's just, it could not be further from the truth. As a matter of fact, one of my favorite things about working with people in this field, and I'm talking about my clients, is that I have worked with everybody from a Satanist all the way down to a Jew, Catholics, Native Americans. Name it, across the board. Sure. And I have learned valuable information and valuable perspective from every single one of them.
Sure.
Because when I'm working with these people, I need to know who they are and why they come from the angle they come from. It's not for judgment purposes.
Exactly.
It's for knowledge. it can help lead us in the right direction.
Well,
And so like I said, as long as people are just good, I just don't care about their belief system. I'm not here to judge. I'm here to just simply understand and tell a story and try to help in any way that I can, whatever that may be.
well, you know what, Brandon? It sounds like you're one of these people that is not caught up in being right, because that's what happens. A lot of people sometimes get caught up in being right. So if they're
Well,
right
I'm wrong
and,
more often
other
than
people
I'm
are
right.
wrong, and it's like, there's
that's and I think I think that is something that I was blessed with,
yeah,
that I didn't understand at the time, was the fact that I did travel all over the world at an early young age, and was able to see a lot of different cultures and societies,
right.
and I experienced all kinds of different things that most people just can't come out of their shell to understand, because they just haven't had that experience, which is
Sure.
fine. But I try to apply that open-mindedness to everything that I do. And that's why I don't care, whether I think your religion is right or wrong. I just don't care. Most of the time when I'm working with people, they don't even know my religion. I don't put it out there just to have it out there, because that's not what I'm there for. They don't need me. I'm not there to preach. I'm not there to convert. And that's the same goes with the skeptic. I'm not there to convert you. I just don't care.
Well, I think the truth is that we are more also than just our religious beliefs, or at least you should be flexible enough, okay, or fluid enough to be able to dialogue, have a relationship, whatever you want to call it, with somebody that's not of your same religious belief or anything. It's like, otherwise you're a very rigid person, and usually doomed to be very unhappy. I'm a big believer in flexibility is the key to happiness, and I mean across the board, whether whatever your belief systems are. And even in this type of work, when you go into somebody's house, let's say somebody calls you in on an investigation, and they're saying, I need help, whatever. Let's say they're having some type of event or something going on they don't understand. If you're a really rigid person and you go in, how are you going to help this family if they're different from who you are or what your belief system is?
Right.
You can't.
Right.
You got to be flexible, and you got to be open, and you got to listen to what they're telling you without some type of prejudice, as in, don't get me wrong. There's a difference between listening to somebody and saying, is there a crisis going on in the family, mental illness, or is there really something, event going on? That's different. That's just differentiating the story, but not when they're genuinely telling you of something that's going on, or the experiences the family members have had, especially if it's more than one person. If you're not open-minded, you're not going to be very successful in this type of field at all, as far as helping people, that is.
Right. Well, and I have scaled back. I have scaled back my private cases for a number of reasons. A lot of them are personal. I'm, of course, anybody is always welcome to contact me, and if I feel like I can help, I'll certainly be happy to. If not, I do have a very small, reliable group of people that I would refer. But just as I've gone on, it's more of a personal, like I said, a personal thing that I have tended to back away a little, because I feel an extreme amount of dedication that sometimes I just can't provide. And I won't take on a scenario that I can't. I used to have the time and the ability to dedicate. I mean, I was making 2-hour back and forth drive, 2 hours each way to a home for 6 months, and I was down there 2 to 3 times a week. But I was still holding a full-time job.
That's a strain.
But that was before I was. Well, it was before I was married, and now my wife and I have we've got multiple kids together, and then we've got the 2-year-old between us, and and so it's very difficult for me to dedicate what I feel like. Because I don't want to shortchange anybody that's having these problems.
Of course not. And that's another thing. You hear of some teams, and I'm sure you've heard it. They go in there, especially if they've got something really, really genuine going on, and they'll go in there and tell you,
Hmm.
yeah, and then they like leave the people hanging like, okay, what do we do now? It's like,
The team got their EVPs and they're on their way.
right, exactly.
And that's and again, I keep my, I guess I'll, my air quotes are up, my professional circle when it comes to this sort of thing. I keep my little circle very little, and that's by absolute design, because there's just too much negativity that goes around in all directions. And to be honest with you, I've just ran into certain people and groups that I can't have that energy around me. I can't do it. And so, my little group of people, and that's why I don't, I'm not out there pursuing a TV show and all this kind of stuff. That's why I prefer to put my experiences on paper.
Let me ask you
Because
something.
then,
When what happened, and because it sounds like, and this is what because I know you've written the 2 books, but it sounds like you've had so many experiences, Brandon, that
hmm
after you had that wow moment where you had the EVPs and then your friend like dies like unexpectedly,
hmm
and like you said, you had this moment. Okay, what do I do? What you obviously it sounds like you based your books on actual experiences that you had. Um,
both books are based on cases that I worked.
exactly. So what happened after
hmm
that? You started going to other cases, and then you ran into the one that you based the book on, or did some time go by before you actually went into that case where you decided to write the book about it?
Well, at the time, shortly after we started, we were all over the place. We were we had a lot of work going on with we were doing a lot of home work with investigations within homes.
Okay.
Um, and so that was something that we all made the time for and had the ability to do. Now, the 2 that ended up being books, in all honesty, I felt like those 2 particular cases somewhat found me rather than the other way around.
Sure.
And so the way that things kind of went down and took place, for very different but extreme reasons, I felt it was very important to tell both stories. Now, the first one, I'll be honest with you, it's funny because I'll be the first to admit when it got published, or when I was approached about it getting published, I had no idea that I was writing a book. Probably 75% of that book was written just based on post-work notes, because I
Okay.
write extensive notes after every time we go out.
Okay.
And so it ended up, I got the offer to have it published, and I'll be honest with you, I put a lot of trust in that publishing process into the wrong people. I did not take the reins myself because it's a huge endeavor. I'll be honest, I feel like that book reads very amateurish as far as, there's a lot of editing.
Okay.
And so that bothered me a little bit, but at the same time, I still felt like the story was very much worth having out there, but I just didn't take the time to put it on myself to really fine-tooth comb it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it came out. I think the story is a good story. It was a very extreme story. And so, if you're looking for Stephen King writing, it's not there. The second one I had edited 3 times front to back myself before it
Okay.
ever touched my publisher's desk. And so it reads a lot more.
You know what? I know
But when it
exactly
came
what
down
you
to both,
mean.
well, and I'll be honest, well, like I said, when I sit down after probably a 12-hour investigation and probably in this instance, it was a 3-hour drive both ways. And so you're awake for somewhere between 16 and 20 hours, and just the adrenaline alone, typing, I don't know how many words a minute, but a lot of that information was just simply thrown down there. And so there's not a lot of rhyme or reason to it. Now, it got cleaned up,
Mm-hmm.
but in my writing, I've always had this tendency to change tenses,
Yeah.
and so it's like 1 second it's past tense, the next is present. It's really annoying to read, and I've driven myself crazy. But I guess the point is that the story in and of itself needed to be told. The basis of the story, this gentleman, he was deaf, and what was in the house, I think, quickly understood that, the running up the stairs, the banging on the walls, your standard, haunted house, quote unquote, noises, just simply, he was totally oblivious.
Okay.
And so it tended to get extremely physical, and it turned out to be something that really, for the most part, didn't even make an effort to hide itself. If you wanted to play, it was there to play, and it would happily oblige. And that's where I made a lot of mistakes. And so I wrote about those, and I wrote about the results, and I wrote about the ramifications that I think, and this was 10 years ago. And so for me, having that story told, I knew I was kind of putting myself out there for a lot of criticism. But I'm perfectly fine with that, because, like I said, one of the biggest driving forces behind putting it out there was that I need people that want to go out and do this. I need them to understand that there are ramifications. There are consequences.
Sure.
And so at the time, I didn't take those consequences seriously, but there were experiences that woke me up real quick. And so, but again, it helped me to be better at what I do. And so that's why that story was so important for me to have out there. And
let me ask you something. When this gentleman, and I don't know how much, was it someplace he moved into that you think that was there already when he moved into it? Or
well, the family, his family had actually owned it on two separate occasions. When he was a child, he spent many years growing up in that house. They ended up moving out because they were creeped out. It was so active.
Wow.
He was the only one that was really deaf, and so the rest of the family had always heard constant noises and voices and all this stuff. So eventually they moved out. And when he got a little older, he just decided, because they still had it within the family, but it sat totally abandoned. And back in the 80s, it was kind of the hangout. Like, a lot of people would sneak in, and there was a lot of like satanic graffiti and things like that down in the basement. And so who knows what kind of stuff happened back when it was abandoned.
Sure.
But anyway, the family reacquired it, and he decided that he was going to go ahead and move in there because none of the stuff that had happened really bothered him.
When he was a kid. Okay.
Right. And so he was just living there by himself. And, for a period of time, it worked out okay. And then it just got very physical and violent. And that's when his cousin actually reached out to me. And so he and I, the gentleman that had lived there, he and I actually, of course, our main communication was by text message, but he and I talked extensively. And, the one thing to this day that he has ever heard in his entire life, it's just the craziest thing. When we were doing our walkthrough, when we had just gotten there, he had shown us the bathroom, and he was kind of trying to explain that in the bathroom, the only thing that he had ever heard in his entire life was somebody screaming in his ear while he was taking a shower, and he nearly broke his neck falling down because it scared him so bad.
Oh my God, that is incredible.
And so, and my thought was, can you just imagine the one thing that you ever hear in your entire lifetime is something that's pure terror? And I can't,
wow.
I can't entirely grasp it. He's a great guy. He's very well adjusted. He's funny. He lives a normal life. But in this instance, I can just only imagine that's the one thing that he just can recall. That's the one time that he had heard something, and he said that it just screamed in his ear.
No, that's what I'm thinking. I'm like, God, of all the things that.
Right.
And did you ever do any? Prior to the family owning it originally, were they the original owners, or had it been?
No. Originally the house was, it was actually a mortuary. It was a funeral home.
It was a mortuary.
Uh-huh.
Oh my God.
And so way back in the day when it was actually erected, I want the 20s or 30s, I can't remember exactly.
Okay.
But the gentleman that had it built was a mortician, and his wife at the time, way back when, had actually mysteriously disappeared. And he was kind of apparently just one of these odd ducks, these kind of weird people. And so I think he was the subject of a lot of rumors around town, because of course back then we didn't have the internet or cable to entertain us, so we picked out the odd duck, and they entertained us with these crazy stories we could make up. And but sure enough, there was always rumors of really, I guess, poor conduct when it came to the corpses, and all these different things. Yeah, and separating fact from fiction obviously is a big thing, but one way or the other, I can say that there had been an established energy in that home that was absolute pure evil. It just was. It was just there was no in between. There was no forgiveness. There was nothing. It was just pure nasty. And that was my first personal up close experience with what I felt to be any sort of a demonic type presence. Right. I know a lot of people, that word gets thrown around a lot. And I do feel like it's much fewer and farther between than we necessarily have come to think or believe. Mm-hmm. But I do feel like in its truest form, that was as evil as it gets.
It's very difficult sometimes for human beings to realize that there's beings out there that have no moral compass. None.
Oh, none. Oh, yeah.
As much as we would talk about
if
psychopaths
anything, it
and stuff,
strength with pain.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
People have a hard time, because I hate to say it, even nowadays you look at these shows, and I'm going to give you a perfect example. Mm-hmm. That show Dexter, where he's a psychopath or a sociopath or whatever he was. And
sure.
They always kind of gave him a moral compass because he had attachments, emotional attachments, and he only killed criminals. But that's like that's like fantasy land. People have a hard time of realizing that there's something that doesn't understand pity or mercy, something that you can't negotiate with, or make deals with. Mm-hmm. And some people have that's totally alien, and what you're describing is exactly that.
And to top off exactly what you're saying, to top it off, these things are so intelligent. They know exactly what your trigger is. They know exactly what scares you. They know exactly how to affect you. Mm-hmm. These things, and you kind of alluded to it earlier, this is psychological warfare. These things, their game is not to respond to your EVP session. That's not their game.
No.
Their game is to climb inside your head and over the course of a decade force you to go insane by any means necessary.
Okay.
I think eventually you start seeing suicides. You start seeing murders.
Yes.
And I mean, when you ask for something, when you dive into something, and you think that you are the big tough guy or girl, and you think that you're going to go ahead and just handle evil in its purest, then I wish you luck. I will pray for you, but you have no idea. You cannot wrap your mind around the force and the level of, like you said, there's no negotiating. There's no, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. I take it back.
Well, you know what? What it wants, and I'm going to say it, I'm going to refer to it as something that's non-human. What it wants is your corruption, okay? And to corrupt somebody, especially if this person is not corrupted, in other words, by this I don't mean you're a goody two-shoes, you're a normal human being, but you're not corrupted, To corrupt somebody like that, like you said, you don't do it overnight.
No.
Okay.
No, of course not.
It takes.
So what's the fun in that?
Of course not. And
that's the thing. when you're at your most vulnerable, something like that'll strike. And and that's just something that we can't really comprehend on a regular basis because it's just not normal for us.
Well,
we read books and we watch movies, and the thing is books and movies don't have the ability to dive into those experiences just because those are not reality.
so
and
let me
what
ask
we're
you something.
dealing with is something that's not a common reality.
Brandon, what happened when you went into this investigation and at some point you're here to help this poor guy? What did anything happen to you, or in other words, because I'm sure, and I don't know if I'm wrong because I have not read your book, where it tried to do something to like either scare you or chase you off or your team?
Oh, well, I mean, that's where we get to talk about my mistakes. I do take steps to attempt to protect myself every time I go out.
Okay.
I skipped those steps one time, and it actually turned out to be the last time I had ever gone down there.
Okay.
It actually, that night it attached itself to me and assaulted me at my own home. And so, to the point of making me wonder whether or not only did I want to keep investigating, but whether or not I wanted to live.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was, again, to Joe Blow reading that story, they're going to say, what kind of a moron, puts himself in this type of position. And knowing darn well that that's coming, when I was writing it, I felt like I had to do it. I had to write it. I had to own it because I brought it on myself. I all but asked for it. As a matter of fact, I'll just flat out say I asked for it. Do this, do something. Well, it did.
Oh, you did that? I'm so sorry.
It did. Oh yeah. Well, like I said, that's the whole thing is a lot of people approach this type and they don't care what they do or the method that they approach. All they're doing is they're trying to get a reaction and they're trying to film the reaction.
Yes, exactly.
And that's my whole point is I did that. I used to do it a lot. And a lot of times I got great evidence out of it. Mm-hmm. But it's not, but in the end, I needed people to understand that you're careful what you wish for, because if you get it, you're not going to understand what's coming until it hits you, and it hits you like nothing has ever hit you before. And so that's why I needed that story to be out there. Absolutely.
Let me ask you something. Was there only this one entity there, or considering what the history had been, was there more stuff there?
No, this was something that I would typically refer to as something to the level of a soul collector.
Oh, wow.
And so no, there were tortured souls just probably crawling out of the walls. And there was also, it was extremely intelligent. But there was a shred of good there, and there was also a lot of residual there. And so it was just, the house was just this almost tornado of energy. But obviously the overwhelming thing was just this massive darkness that was just so powerful. But no, I felt as though there were many trapped souls there, because in our audio and everything else, we, whether there was some mimicking going on or pretending or deception or anything like that, but I didn't feel that was the case. I felt like there was an abundance of personality there. It was very multiple personality. But when the darkness came out, everything else stopped. It came to the forefront, and it did what it wanted or needed to do. And so, no, I felt like that. And I feel like that was something that likely would have been conjured. which then meant I had no idea if it was even possible to do anything about it, being that typically if something's conjured, either the person that conjures it or a reversal of whatever method was used to conjure said being needs to be involved. And there was just simply no way of knowing that. I mean, there was just no way to know.
Right.
And so, like I said, it got me to the point where I didn't know if I was going to live or die. And so, and you know what? The gentleman that had been living there, it was about a week prior to that night, he left the house and he swore off it forever. He's never been back since. He just left.
I was about to ask you, because I know where you're going with this. I'm thinking, how could anybody live there?
Nobody does now, but the people that owned it actually rented it to several families even after he left.
Oh.
And they everybody that moved in would only be there for a month or two. And now I think the city owns it and it's in ruins. It should just be torn down. So.
Well, and you know what? It's really interesting based on what you're telling me that this was a product of something that was conjured there. In other words, it was invoked.
Well, that's my opinion.
Right.
Yeah,
no,
well, that's my opinion.
You're pretty much on the money. It makes you wonder. Obviously, this was because I know you said that there was a point that it was abandoned, but it sounds, considering that when his family originally was there, they had their experiences. You would think that was there prior to that time that it was abandoned. So.
I think the likelihood of there being activity there ever since the original owner, I think the likelihood of that is extremely high. Yeah. Just given the circumstances, I mean, how many funeral homes and mortuaries and things of that nature would you walk into and expect not to have at least some sort of an altered energy somewhere around?
Of course, even if it's even if it's transitions.
Just the emotion alone. Oh yeah, the emotion alone, just the emotion of the people that visit these places alone. It's so palpable. It would be nearly impossible to think that absolutely nothing is out of the ordinary there.
You can't.
And so I feel like it was almost a magnet to whatever may have happened while it was abandoned. You see what I'm saying? I feel like the groundwork had been laid, and then somebody, I think, just kind of dropped the bomb.
Sure.
And then from there, I think that opened up whatever this doorway or portal or whatever you want to call it. I think that's kind of how that went down.
And
like I said,
let me tell you something that's incredible that he actually, and you made a good point. I guess when he was younger and he was there, but he was deaf, he kind of like didn't get hit full force, and that's why he went back there.
Oh yeah, he had no fear of the place whatsoever when he moved back in a second time. None. Everybody else was a little bit queasy about going there because they used to hear things all the time and everything else. And that's why I tell you, I feel like, in a manner of speaking, I think there was a lot of energy left behind just from what the place originally was. But then when something was brought in, energy was just on another level. And so I think it just fed on that energy that was already there.
Oh, I'm sure. And, I mean, there could have... Let me tell you something. That mortician, maybe not. We don't want to put on the poor guy because maybe all he did was just being a mortician. Right. And somebody's got to do it. But the thing that his wife disappeared mysteriously is not a good thing either.
Yeah, there was a lot of, there was a lot of little weird nuances that came with that story. I can only really do so much digging because there was really only so much that was published,
Right, yeah.
So you're going on a lot of word of mouth, and then you're going on word of mouth from generations. And so who knows what was cooked up.
Yeah.
But I was able to confirm. Well, I was able to confirm the address was used for that purpose when it was originally built. I know that for sure. As far as the gentleman himself, he was never convicted of anything.
Right.
There was a lot of suspicion, and I think there was a lot of investigation, but I don't know that he was ever convicted of anything.
Well, yeah, and also, and I mean, I don't know what year that happened, but back then, no body, no crime. It's not like now that they can
Right.
convict you on circumstantial evidence. Back then, if, you know,
Right.
you could say, hey,
There was
she
no
ran off with a
DNA.
boyfriend and left me. So
Hmm.
that's that. So, yeah.
Well, and one of our theories is that she was buried underneath the house. Well, it's kind of hard to explain because the way the house stood, there was this basement part of the structure, but then there was kind of a cement wall that was kind of a load-bearing wall, but there was also about a 2-foot separation between that and the under part of the house, at least, that carried under part of it. And one of my buddies who is very sensitive, and I've actually proven him to be, and talk about skeptical, I am very skeptical of anybody that's going to tell me this happened here and this person. And, the psychic thing, I just don't know. And so I test him more than I would ever test anybody, and I run him through the ringer. But when I get anything but the thing is oftentimes his story ends up correlating 90% of the time. And so, sorry, apparently we've got drag races. Anyway, his thought, he was very just set on it. She is buried somewhere under there. And, that, of course, is a nearly impossible feat to, if you take that to a small town sheriff department, you pretty much get laughed out the door, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and let me tell you something. People, in modern times, with what we've got now with DNA evidence and this and that, and like I said, people now, let's say somebody disappears, and even though the body's not found, some people end up, if not convicted, at the very least arrested because suspicion. But back in those years, okay, especially like not now that they can find you wherever. People would say, hey, this person left. She left me. She ran off with a boyfriend. Right. She told me I'm tired of you. And if nobody ever produced the body, like you said, they could suspect them and there could be innuendos and things around town. Sure. But that would be the end of it. That was it.
Right. Right. And so there was a lot of, there was a lot of kind of, I guess, loose ends with that story. I mean, not to mention the fact, I have never been back there. I'm invited. I'm not to that point, though. I think eventually maybe I'll go back.
Okay.
But I haven't. But at this point, no. I mean, the answer is no. I am not. I feel like, yeah, there's got to be at least a little bit of crazy in all of us that are out there doing this, but
yeah.
there's a big difference between crazy and dumb, right?
Yeah, yeah,
and
so, also self-preservation.
Yeah.
So
well, yeah, and so eventually, who knows?
This guy, at the very least, you helped this person, this guy, who I guess said, "That's it, I'm out of here. Whatever it is can keep the house. That's it."
Oh yeah. Well, and he and I, to this day, we still communicate here and there. We're still good buddies. But yeah, that's one of the big benefits about doing this sort of thing with people is you do tend to develop these, because you have affected their life differently than anybody else,
Right.
And so to me that's a big thing, because I'd have never had any reason whatsoever to even cross this guy's path. And so but it turns out we really kind of experienced some things together that we will always just hold between us. And to me that's a big bonus as far as some side effects of what we do. Because you can, and he knows, he was one of those people that had that relief when I told him. I said, you're not crazy. This is not only are you not crazy, but I can't fathom how you were able to deal with this for as long as you did.
How long was he there the second time?
4 years.
4 years?
Now it escalated.
Okay, yeah.
I think it started at the point where little nuances and annoyances and things of that nature. And then eventually this thing just wanted attention. It wanted him to acknowledge the fact that it was there, and it also wanted to prove the point that it was in charge. Mm-hmm. And so when that happened, he ended up hospitalized, and that's what ended up drawing us down there. That's what had his cousin reaching out to us, because he ended up in the hospital with a concussion. And
wow.
So that, and that was near the end, and we were going down there regularly, pretty constantly for, I think our investigation lasted somewhere between 4 and 6 months.
Let me ask you: did any of your team members or him, did you guys ever see anything, or was it just auditory or experiences?
Oh no! I had never seen shadows. What looks like shadows. I had never seen a blacker than black color walk and move and come and go until this place, and it was everywhere. Oh. And yeah, it was, the one thing that I did not get a lot of, other than knocking and sounds of footsteps, I did not get disembodied voices, but it was very audible through EVP. Very audible through EVP. Okay. But not something we were hearing audibly with our ears at the time. And so I spent an absurd amount of time diagnosing and going through reviewing tons of audio when we would come back from a trip, and it was constant, between just, as a matter of fact, and it was very drawn to him. Oh. We were down in I was very drawn to him. When he was there, everything would just escalate. And now I will say this: since he's left, he has been perfectly fine. He has not been bothered. He has not had any more experiences. Nothing.
Yeah, it was about
but
that
when
location.
He was in that house. Yeah, when he was in that house, there was one piece of audio where he was downstairs with me, and he started to just get agitated for no reason. But when I reviewed the audio, there were several voices that were almost taunting him, like whispering at him, and there was 2 or 3 voices at any given time, and it kept getting more and more intense, and so did his reaction.
Wow.
And so something like that really affected. And it wasn't too long after that he ended up leaving, and I can't even tell you the relief that I had for him when he just decided to cut ties, because I had no answers. I didn't, and I knew there were going to be a lot of people out there that said, well, here's what we need to do, but I just didn't have a lot of faith in that, and I just simply didn't see a peaceful solution in that house for him. I don't think that he would have ever been able to live a peaceful life in that house.
Yeah. And you know what? I'm not going to say that it happens all the time, but you know what? There are locations, exactly like what you're describing, a place that the basis of it, because of what it was, that at some point, it's like, forget the house blessing, forget the exorcism, forget all of that. Yeah. This is one of these places that you got to abandon. And I'm not one for telling people to leave, because I'm not. But there's some places like that forget it.
Yeah, I would have never told him to leave. I never did, and I never even gave him my opinion of him leaving. That was his life decision. That was completely up to him. I was there on invitation, and I shared information with him. Never once did I ever, and never would I ever, try to convince anybody that this is what you should do. I mean, as a matter of fact, there's a show on. They'll flat out say you need to leave, or and who are we to
exactly?
Maybe you're the most talented psychic in the entire world, and maybe you are spot on, and maybe you know exactly what you're doing and talking about. But who the hell am I to walk into someone's house and say you need to go? I mean, are you kidding me? How? I can't hold that liability. I mean,
no, and some people, let me tell you something. And I know what you're talking about. Can you imagine how difficult it would be mentally if you tell somebody that, but they really have no means of doing that. Financially, a lot of
course.
reasons.
Of
And
course.
here you've kind of condemned them and let them know, well,
Oh, it's devastating. It would have to be the most devastating thing. Well, this is all we have, and you're saying that we have to get rid of it. And we don't have the $2,000 down payment for this other place. And
right.
you know, it's like who would I be to walk into anybody's home and say you got to go? Now I will say this: if it came down to it, and if I have to tell that person that personally I won't spend any more time in this place, and here's the reasons why.
Sure.
Now what they do with that information is
That's
entirely
different.
up to them.
That's different.
And so, you know, and I can make recommendations. Maybe it would be a good idea to seek this spiritual advisor. And the thing is his family had a preacher come to the house who
really?
only spent about I think he was in there for about 10 minutes, and then he left sick to his stomach, and he would not come back. He wouldn't return their calls or anything else.
Wow.
This place was real. This place was legit. And so, but, you know, when you go to the people of faith that you know, preach faith, and then they don't want to deal with whatever's behind those walls.
That's bad. That's bad right there.
Yeah, it's not good. It's not good. And so quickly you run out of options.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, you can call in, and I've even had, not in his case, but in another pretty intense case, I had another person call in another group, and the other group lasted about half a night in a home where we had been in and out, and I'll tell everybody I work with right up front, I am not a one-night answer guy.
Right.
I'm just not. Because I think anybody that presents themselves as a one-night answer person or group is full of it. I just think they're full of it. There's no way you can have all the
because
answers
it's just
and
not an
solutions
on-demand
in
thing.
night.
You could go one night and absolutely nothing happens, and then you go the next week and everything's changed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and so, you know, I tell everybody up front, what you end up doing, and you know, I'll provide as much information as I can, but what you end up deciding, this is your home, this is your life, you're inviting me in here as a guest, and I'm going to try to do my best to help you in any way I possibly can, and I'll even make suggestions along the way, but you know, in the end, you're going to make the decisions, and that's not on me. I can't do that for you, because that would be irresponsible of me, because I can't tell you without any question or doubt whatsoever that I'm right. I can't. I can tell you I feel strongly about this, but I can't guarantee you that I'm right. There's no way I can. That goes back to the expert talk. I actually was doing a similar interview with a gentleman a year or two ago, and, you know, he was talking about this expert and that, and when I kind of barked back at who are all these experts? Like, why is this a field of research still when we have so many experts around? I mean, what exactly constitutes an expert? Is it 30 years of field experience? I mean, I can be bad at my job for 30 years and still have my job.
Yeah.
You know, it happens. It doesn't make me an expert.
Okay.
And so, you know, and he actually equated it to an athlete being a Hall of Fame caliber athlete at a sport, saying they're an expert at that sport. The difference being is one has a rule book, one has a certain set of skills, one has absolutes, and this is not anything like that.
I was going to say, that's the one thing that's absolute, is there are no absolutes in this.
Exactly, and that's what I told him. I was just like, man, I don't understand your rational or your rationale here. Like, there is no correlation.
Exactly.
There just isn't. And so, you know, if you want to call yourself, because you host a radio show for 5 or 6 years, you want to call yourself a paranormal expert because you interview all the paranormal investigators, good for you. If that's what makes you sleep better at night, then you do what you've got to do. But personally, I just think that these things get thrown around as though it's like it has nothing to do with research, and it has nothing to do with answers. It has everything to do with getting on TV. or
Exactly.
getting as many likes on Facebook as you can get, which I'm just not very active on the Facebook page. Shame on me, because I try to be interactive. You know, if people reach out to me and talk to me and everything else, I try to be interactive. But I'm just not that person. I'm not going to be on many bestseller lists with my books because I'm not a marketer. You know,
Well,
I want it out there and I want it accessible, but I'm just not a marketer.
well, and this is the thing, Brandon, which is what I say. When you go in there, let's say not even in a case as intense as what you were describing. Let's say
Sure.
something where maybe it's just a regular, normal dead person. Hasn't moved on for whatever
Sure.
reason. It depends what you're
Yeah.
going in there for. Like you said,
hmm
capture proof, help the family, find out what needs to be done to get this, resolved. And that's
hmm
different. But if you're going in there, like you said, for notoriety, okay, then you're going to amp up and produce stuff and, you know, uh, uh, make things sometimes even worse than it might possibly be. Because what you're looking
Absolutely.
for is, like you said, the wow moment, the shock value,
Uh-huh.
not the,
Uh-huh.
okay, we validated that it is real. Like you said, you're not going crazy. Good news.
Uh-huh.
Now let's move on to what we can do about it. What are we dealing with? Okay, but that's a
Right.
different caliber than,
hmm
okay, I'm going to, describe something really scary and God, that you're going to be like, oh my God. And it's like, okay, but so who are you there for? For yourself, like you said, your
Right.
ratings? Or are you really
Uh-huh.
there to help this person or persons or,
Sure.
just handle what's there? Because that's another thing. People don't realize that in this work, there's different levels. You go to some places, and really what you got there is just residual. All it is just a
hmm
loop that's just playing over. Sometimes it's just certain noises, like let's say walking up and down the stairs, or certain smells.
Uh-huh.
Like let's say at a certain time you get this smell of either bread baking or coffee, for example. And there's really
Right.
there's no intelligence. There's just something that happens so many times that it's embedded in the
hmm
tapestry of that place. Okay,
Right.
on a metaphysical plane, people don't understand. It's not like the actual wall; it's the metaphysical fabric of that building or that
Sure.
place. But there's no intelligence. In
Yeah.
other words, it's kind of wigs you out a little bit if you don't know what it is, but it's not going to
hmm
do anything to you.
Right.
And probably given enough time, it might even fade eventually. And then,
I was going to say, usually the only thing that's going to fix something like that is time, if
yeah,
anything at all.
exactly.
But it's
Yeah,
not
eventually
dangerous.
it just, for all
It
the time it
it's
happened,
going
once
to.
it doesn't, and then, you've got and then you've got, sometimes you've got travelers, what I call, they're not really fixed to the place. They came by. Maybe it's something having to do with the people there, not necessarily the structure, that's a whole different thing, depending, because I don't know, have you ever had any investigations where you talk to people and once you really get talking to them, they start describing where just about every place they've been at, they've had some type of supernatural event, and then you realize, hey, it's not the place, it's you. And there are
Sure.
attachments to people.
Absolutely. No
So
question about it.
there's
No
different
doubt
things.
about
You
it at
can't. It's
all.
not a one size fit all kind of deal.
hmm
Uh,
No,
and
not
and and
well, and that's the thing. There's no perfect explanation
oh
for any of
no,
it,
no, no. And you
and
know what?
so.
I tell people something as far as solutions that they'll go, "Oh, you're kidding." I go, "Yeah." The kiss, keep it simple, silly. I'll say in silly,
Uh-huh.
which is
Uh-huh.
number one. And I know sometimes there's, don't be scared, laugh a lot, have a good time.
Uh-huh.
If you start getting all intense and scared, and all you do is like you're there like waiting for the next little noise, basically you're feeding the energy that's driving it. Chances are you might even
Sure.
attract something that's not even there now. But if you
Sure.
start, like, for lack of a better word, let the sunshine in, watch a funny
hmm
movie, have laughs, have a party, have good
hmm
times, and not engage in it, depending on what it is. I'm not going to say this always works, but a lot of times this will dissipate some energy, or all of a sudden it
Uh-huh.
slows down,
hmm
and eventually, because I think that human beings sometimes when they put a lot of focus on something, especially out of fear, which is a very, very intense emotion, it amps it up. It's like it's supercharging whatever the source is.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
like I said, it doesn't apply all the time. It applies sometimes depending on what's going on. Sometimes if you've got a
Hmm.
family that's having a little bit of trouble, it's like, you know what? Lighten up a little bit. Like go out, go to the park. Um, you know, don't sit around waiting for the bad thing to happen, which is unfortunately what happens in a lot of times where when people are scared. They're scared,
Uh-huh.
but at the same time, their expectations are, or they anticipate the next horrible event or feeling or noise or whatever it is. And you can't, that's a horrible
You
way to
know,
live. It's a horrible way to live.
on on those lines, you know, one of my grandmothers used to say the old saying. I'm sure we all know it, that cleanliness is next to godliness.
Yeah. Hmm.
And I cannot tell you what just a top to bottom,
Yes.
under every rug corner and everything else, just a
Yes.
good, hard, pure cleaning.
Yes.
Clean that place. Make that place sparkle.
Yes.
I can't even tell you the difference that something like that makes.
Hmm.
Because I have had to tell people before, I would love to work with you, and I'm willing to work with you, and I will come back, but I will not come back until this place is clean. And
Hmm.
I'm talking
Yes.
about, because you're talking about borderline, if not full-on hoarder situations.
Yes. I've
And
seen that.
it's like, well, you have a built-in claustrophobic scenario here. Of course, you're psychologically off right now because
Yeah.
this pile of stuff may fall on you or your child at any moment.
Yeah.
Clean, get rid of
Yes.
the junk. And so that's one thing that I have, and it's an uncomfortable conversation because you don't want to tell anybody how to live.
Right.
But
But
I will give you that ultimatum. I will say I'll be happy to help you, and I think I can help you, but I will not subject myself or my team members to a place that we just can't function in.
yeah.
And so it's going to be a situation where you can let me know when you've cleaned all this up, or find somebody else that can help you. And I
Sure.
wish you the best, and do what you got to do. And I understand. I've had some people get offended by that, which I get it. But that's just I have to have my expectations,
Oh,
because
sure.
you can't be asking me for a solution and not want to be part of the solution, because you're going to have to be part of the solution whether you like it or not in
Right.
some form or fashion.
Exactly.
And so,
And that's a very
go ahead.
good point. You don't go in there, wave a magic wand, and go, ding, your problem solved.
No,
Like, uh-huh.
no, no. And so, you can't participate and you can't cooperate on just certain basic things. Like, I get it. Some homes are just simply cleaner than others, and that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not judging anybody. My home with 4 kids running around certainly is not always spotless. I mean, God
Sure.
bless my wife for keeping it up the way she does, and I try to do my best. But in the end, you can't have an inch layer of dust and filth everywhere,
Sure. No, no,
and
no.
and piles, yeah, and piles of just stench and things that have built up over who knows how many years. That has to play a psychological effect on
Oh, I know
somebody.
it does. I know it does. And I
And
know what you're saying.
and
You don't go in
so,
there with a white glove or anything, but what you're saying is, I'm not talking about,
no,
no, what you're talking about is, hey, man, and you need to declutter, like either clean and get rid of some of this junk. And that right there, believe it or
uh-huh.
not, sometimes is a good indicator of the root of some problems that people have.
Oh, no question. You know what? I have walked into, a matter of fact, I actually had one lady, she was very embarrassed about that conversation, and I got that. And I tried to preface, I said, look, I'm not trying to judge you or embarrass you or anything like that, but here's my opinion. Here's my thoughts. And I'm going to have to say that I have to take a step back unless we can do these simple things. I said, I need this place clean. It's just gotten out of hand. It's a dangerous place, and it's not something that I can work in. I said, I'll come back, but I need it clean first. And I suggested, I said, being that it's springtime, almost summertime, open every window in the house that has a screen. Open it for 24 hours
Mm-hmm.
and just
Air it
leave them
out.
open. Just let air flow in any direction it needs to flow. Just let it go and feel some of that. don't live in a boarded up home just cluttered everywhere. It psychologically is going to break you
No.
down eventually, whether you know it or not.
Well, and the problem
And
is
sure
sometimes
enough,
when they fail to
she
see
felt
it.
10 times better.
Yeah,
She
of
felt
course.
10 times better when we came back. She said, I was embarrassed, but thank you, because it helped immensely. I said, well, of course it did, because, our lives get so busy sometimes that we crawl into our little shell and we just forget the fact that we have to breathe. And when your home is built around the antithesis of breathing freely, you're going to have problems. I mean, whether it's paranormal or not, but and God bless her, she got to the point where things got so much better, and that was a great thing. But until then, she didn't know what to do. But that was a starting point, and it was an important starting point, and it got us all going in the right direction. And eventually, the rut that they were in and the issues they were having are completely gone and haven't been back since. And that was 8 years ago.
And that was the thing, and that's what I mean, Brandon. That a lot of people think, could it be so simple? Yeah, some solutions, not all, but sometimes the solutions are that simple and that basic. And
absolutely.
that like that suggestion that you gave her. This is the starting point. And like I said, there's a lot that you can tell sometimes as to also, I'm not going to say all the time, but sometimes it opens the door for things to come through when you've got somebody, like you said, that because they've got something going on in their head, and before you know it, like you said, they fail to see it, or they see it, but they feel so helpless that they don't even make the effort until somebody puts a pressure on them like you did.
Well, and it breeds depression, and it breeds, being paranoid. It just does. And so, there's kind of a psychological fight back going on when you just simply clean everything up and air it out.
Of course.
It's almost like if something's punching you, this is how you punch back.
Yes.
Because if you've just allowed this situation to get so out of control, then maybe that's lending to some of this negativity that you're constantly feeling and experiencing. And so, I do. And that's where, like I said, I don't want to ever judge anybody I'm there with, but I'll just flat out tell you, one of the first things I'll tell them, look, sometimes the truth hurts and sometimes the truth sucks, and you may not even want to hear the truth. But I'm going to tell you from my perspective the truth that I see. And what you do with that is entirely up to you.
Exactly. And that right there also gives you a good idea if people are willing, if they're really, really interested in improving what's going on with them. And by that, and you made a good point.
Absolutely.
Where some people think that, especially when they have a legitimate, supernatural event going on, like they expect somebody to walk in through the door and resolve it, and they can just stand in the corner and watch it and not participate. And it's like, no, this is your house, your life, or your family's life, and you've got to be involved, because once we leave, there might be something that you need to do on a daily basis, not to let it reoccur. It's a process. But if you think somebody's going to come in here and just wave a magic wand and then it's over now, okay, which I hate to say, some of the shows kind of like point you in that direction unrealistically.
Yeah.
And there isn't. It's a process where, like you said, especially depending on what the family dynamics are or what's going on, especially if they're going to stay someplace. It's a work in progress, and a lot of people fail to see that.
Well, and I think a lot of people that tend to get into the field because of the shows don't understand the differentiation process that has to happen between Hollywood and everything else, because really, let's be honest, it only takes just a drop of common sense to realize, when they create a show, when they air a show, they need to get ratings. They have to, or that show is not going to be long for that station. And that's their job, and that's their profession, and that's what they do. They get ratings. That's what they need to do. but in this field, there's not a lot of room for interpretation when it comes to presentation of what you call evidence. There's just not. There is a big question of credibility, and that's why I've always, as a matter of fact, I've been approached to do certain shows. I actually did one show because it was a historical piece that I thought was really interesting, and so I was happy to do it. But I've also been approached about the other aspect, the collection of evidence and investigation, and I'm not super interested in that because eventually I want to present my stories as they're told, and I want my presentation powers, not anybody in a corporate office, to be able to tell me how this story needs to be told. And that's why eventually I want to couple my writing with documentary filmmaking.
Right.
And so to me, and again, it allows me to give you a visual of what we do and why we do it and the things that occur during the process. It's not necessarily to convince you. Now, if we collect compelling evidence, of course we'll present it as such. But, again, my trying to prove the existence of this stuff only goes so far. I think you're kind of beating your head against a wall trying to do that because, let's be honest, it's just not that easy to do. And I don't know that there's a scenario that anybody's going to have on film them running up to Bigfoot, high-fiving Bigfoot, and that's just the end of the discussion about Bigfoot. I don't think that's coming.
No. But you know what?
And there's never going to be a film of a ghost caught on tape that somebody's not going to be out there saying it was doctored.
Of course,
it's
especially nowadays with all the technology that's out there that allows you to do that. Yeah,
it's too easy to do. It's too easy to doctor. And so from a skeptic's point of view, if I wasn't there, I have to say, well, was it real? I don't know.
Sure.
And, but that's not to deter anybody from trying to do this.
No.
But
they really need to know what they're getting into.
It's not what's presented on TV.
Well, a lot of people, and let me ask you, once you finish with that case, which sounds like a doozy, and like you said, you were involved with it for several months. Did you need to take a break after that, or what happened after you did that case?
It was about, let me think. It was about a 6 month. I was still investigating. Matter of fact, we found that's when I was really starting to get into a lot of the Ley Line research that I've been doing now for the last 8 or so years. That's one of my main focuses.
Okay.
Is Ley Line Research. And so it was about 6 months after that case. We had gone out. We had found a few places that we would just go investigate just to kind of test new equipment and things of that nature. And so we really enjoyed that. But I didn't take on any additional cases. And that's what led actually to the second book. My research on ley lines and history kind of took me to a geographic location. So I started doing a lot of research down in that area.
Okay.
And that's when I ended up being in touch with a lady that coordinated what turned out to be a 7-year investigation at a private property down in Oklahoma. That was just on a different level than anything that I ever realistically thought.
That's what it sounds like. Wow.
It was. And that's the second book. It spans, and it's funny. One of the biggest criticisms of that is there's this, there's this, there's this, there's this, and this. There's no way this is nonfiction because this guy's full of it. There's aliens and there's Bigfoots and there's ghosts and there's demons and there's all this and that. And one of the first things I think you read in the book is the events you're about to read took place over the course of 7 years. And I'll be honest with you, this place was like its own different reality. And it was one of the craziest things about it is just one new type of activity after another kept presenting itself. It was almost as though the second we thought we figured something out, something entirely different would just come out of nowhere. It was insane. But anyway, that's kind of what took us into that.
Were there ley lines over there on that property? Is that how you came to work with it?
Within 3 miles. There's
Okay.
an intersection of actually there was an intersection of actually 5 ley lines. It's one of the bigger geographic clusters of intersecting ley lines in the mainland United States. There's about 8 to 10 of them throughout the mainland United States of that size. And this
Okay.
one just happened to be the closest one geographically to me, and so that's why I pursued it.
Okay.
Um, and then the history that came along with it was pretty stunning.
Wow.
My 2-year-old's about to come in, and she's
Don't worry about it. But anyway, as a matter of fact, I wanted to thank you, Brandon, so for the time. This has been a fascinating, fascinating conversation. And I want to bring you back because I want to talk about that second book, because something that you did for 7 years. As a matter of fact, I was going to ask you, if you
sure.
had done any dowsing as far as the work with the ley lines and etc. Because I know that
Hmm.
sometimes there are permutations off central ley lines that you can discover with dowsing rods. Um, that like
Hmm.
as far as within a property itself. Like you said, you knew that it
Oh,
was within a main line within a couple of miles. It sounds like, but
well, it was the intersection of 5 main lines, and
wow.
so right, we were kind of in what I would consider to a certain extent a very large vortex, and so
No
yeah,
wonder.
and yeah, and I've actually done a lot of work with dowsing. I like the older school, I guess you'd call it.
Yes,
Uh,
I've worked with dowsing rods. As a matter of fact,
to be
I have my
really.
pair of dowsing rods there. As a matter of fact, they're hung behind
Hmm.
my door. I everywhere I go on any investigation, I always take my dowsing rods. I've used dowsing rods really, really well a lot of times,
Hmm. For sure.
and I've ruled out,
Oh yeah.
I consider myself a subconscious behaviorist, so I understand really well how the subconscious works. Where, you get some people that will tell you um, that what you get with dowsing rods are your subconscious sometimes, but I've worked with them and I brought stuff through that there was no way I knew, so it wasn't in my subconscious mind. Like
Hmm.
up to a certain point,
Sure.
yeah, there's stuff you don't know, but there's stuff that I
Hmm.
don't know. So I've worked with dowsing
Right.
rods for a lot of years, and like you said, to use that word, it's old school and basic, but it's really good. It's really
Hmm.
good. It's a little
Oh
bit
yeah,
time
absolutely.
consuming depending on what you're doing if you don't have a lot of time, but as a tool, they are excellent, excellent tools.
No, I totally agree. Yeah,
Especially if you've got
absolutely.
especially if you got a dowsing rod that you've worked with for a long time. I want to say, believe it or
Hmm.
not, those things, when you work with them for a while, like a particular dowsing rod, you kind of like,
Hmm.
I know this is like, but there's like it works with you. There's a binding as far as the user. As a matter of fact, I don't even let anybody ever use my dowsing rods because
Well, yeah, I
it
could see
works that
that.
way. That it works that way. But anyway, I know you've got children and a 2-year-old boy. Yeah, I remember the day. So thank you so very much, Brandon. It has been wonderful to speak to you. Um,
Well,
it was
likewise.
great. It was
I've
great.
enjoyed it very much,
No,
and so yeah, let me know. We'll reconvene and dive
absolutely.
even deeper.
Absolutely. Thank you so, so very much, and have a fantastic weekend, okay?
You too.
Take
And
care.
so yeah, I appreciate it. We'll talk to you all soon.
Absolutely. Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye bye.
Oh, my God. That was great. That was fantastic. I know. I know. You can say, Marlene, you say that about everybody, but I do because I think all my guests are super interesting. But let me tell you something. Um, I've had a lot of different guests, some authors, paranormal and or paranormal investigators, but you know what I liked about Brandon? That what he was describing is very authentic as far as how dark some investigations some get. Well, some locations, in other words, and as a result, the investigation can get. Um, and I've said this before, and I'll probably say it again. Paranormal investigations can be very interesting. They can be fun, especially if you belong to a group that you gel with. Okay, it's not like, oh, you go in there all serious. Sometimes, yeah, having a good relationship with your team, even if it's a team of two, is great. It's fantastic. As a matter of fact, you have great memories. But you always go into this work with the understanding that there might be a chance, it's not common, but there is a chance that you are going to stumble over something very dark in your investigation. And when I say very dark, I don't mean your regular dead person that's lost their way or has ownership over that land or whatever, because that can be dealt with. I'm talking about something like what Brandon was describing. Okay, something that, let me tell you something. His description of a soul collector, that was really creepy. And think about it. You know, a place where people were laid to rest, where maybe you had spirits that were trapped or lost because they didn't transition well after their death. And maybe they came, this was one of the, you know, sometimes spirits will follow their body around if they don't understand exactly what happened to them. And they're trying to get back in their body, but they can't, but they don't want to lose sight of it. And sometimes they will go to funeral homes, and then sometimes they go off to the cemetery. And some of them along the way kind of figure it out, especially if at the beginning, when their loved ones came for them, they didn't go because they didn't think they were dead. They didn't understand what had happened to them. And some of them get stuck. And without really knowing, because, you know what, maybe this poor mortician didn't do anything sinister. I mean, somebody's got to do that work, folks. Okay? Maybe he had nothing whatsoever to do, you know, with attracting whatever was dark there, or wanting to bind those spirits to stay there. Because that's the difference. But maybe he did. You never know. Or maybe between the years that this mortician owned it and it maybe went to the hands. I'll tell you what, if you have got a person or a group of people who work with any type of divination or magic where they use the dead, you better believe that a place like a mortuary or mortician or funeral home to them is the perfect place to work rituals or spells, especially if they're trying to bind a spirit for divination purposes, which, by the way, that does. I've seen that. Okay. This is like, okay, this is the place to go. I'm going to collect here a lost spirit of a human being who's kind of lost their way, might be aware they're dead, might not be aware they're dead, but I'm going to bind it. And I'm going to use it. Okay. And that's a whole nother show of how they can use it. That person, I mean there's a big question mark on how this entity or this dark force entity went in there and took over the place and made it unlivable. I got to read the book, and I got to read the other book, and I'm sure you guys have been seeing the covers of the books that I've shown them, which, by the way, a link to Brandon on Facebook, it's going to be in the credits of the show, and you can find his books on Amazon. But anyway, you know what? Like I said, paranormal investigations are fantastic. They're interesting. If you're ready sometimes to put up with boring nights, you'll make a lot of great memories with your group if you gel good with them. Like no paradrama. Thank you. You'll have a lot of moments of excitement when you actually capture evidence. Sometimes you get it right then and there. Sometimes you get it after the fact. But then, always with the understanding that you can come across situations like this, and that you got to really think good and hard about how it affects you, because he admitted to it, and I'm glad he did, because I think everybody does it. That despite all the books you can read, you can make a big whopping mistake, like he said, because he asked the wrong thing to prove itself. And sometimes that's exactly what they're waiting for. Almost like, you know how they, you know, the prototypical vampire story, he can't come in your house unless you invite him. A lot of these entities, that's exactly what they're waiting for. They keep a very low profile, and they almost mimic human spirits, hoping, or very subtle and hoping that you're going to do exactly that. The challenge, which is basically I'm opening the door for you to come into my space and basically give me what I just asked for. And I'll tell you that much. Once that door is open, it takes a lot to close. A lot. Okay? So I'm glad he pointed that out. That's not to scare people off, but it's a cautionary tale up to a certain point, as far as how dark this work can get. And I'm not kidding. In other shows I've said, you know what? I understand that sometimes certain things happen where it's not financially viable for a family to move out of a house that's just like really out of control. But it's a hard thing to tell a family, you got to go. And like, go where? Live under a bridge? You mean I got to... No, but there are times, and in this case where this guy beat him to the punch, he left, good for him, and he was able to do so. Well, yeah, you know what? There are places like this which are not habitable for whatever reason. That you could say, well, we're going to do a house blessing. According to Catholic rites, you can't exorcise a building. You can exorcise people. But you can do blessings. Depending on what's going on. Was there something in the land, you know? Was this lady buried underneath the house? Yeah, who knows? God, it could have been a million things. Okay? Of how, like he said, that you don't know the origins of, to know how to address it. But barring all of that, there comes a point where you say, you know what, burn the place down. Well, not burn it, but it's like it's not habitable. All right, and like he said, people tried living in there, and they lasted maybe a month, 2 months, and then they're out of there. Okay, and that's what happens, and where it's like, and I guess what I'm trying, because there's some places, and you know, some paranormal investigators have opened up houses that are haunted, and they use them almost like labs for paranormal investigators to go in there and experience it during a weekend. There's several of them across the United States. The actual owners, which are paranormal investigators, don't live there, but they open it up for teams to go in there and do EVP sessions and see if they can capture stuff because they've authenticated what's there. But there's some houses that you can't even do that. It's dangerous. It's a dangerous place for human beings to be in, even for a weekend. Okay? And let me tell you, hats off, because he stuck to it. He really helped this guy out the most he could, and thankfully this man was able to leave, which I think was really an unusual thing, that when he was a child, because of its deafness, he got spared from a lot of what his family was experiencing. However, when he came back, it upped the ante and said, okay, now I'm going to deal with you. You know, since you're the only one in the house, I'm going to have you experience things in a way that I know you can't ignore. Okay, so that was pretty dark. But anyway, guys, I hope you liked the show. Subscribe to my channel. Hit the like button. Whether you're viewing it on YouTube or you're catching the podcast version on any of the other platforms, just subscribe to me so that you get notified whenever I release a new show. My true believers, don't forget to visit me and submit your true ghost story at miamighostchronicles.com. Also, I've had a lot of requests. I put out my first book, Haunted History of the Old West Wicked Ladies, and people wanted me to do more of that, so I might be coming out with another book along those lines, as far as the Old West soiled doves and the ones that stuck around because no, usually sometimes they died tragically or they just loved the wrong man, and sometimes the men hang around too. Either way. So guys, thanks again so much for being part of my audience. It is fantastic, and I think you're all wonderful. Today is a Saturday for me, so have a fantastic weekend. Take care.